Hey guys, and welcome to another video. Today, I am going to welcome you to going to sleep with me process. I generally read a book right before I go to bed, and today I am reading this book. It's called Happiness Advantage. This is one of those books that I felt I wanted to buy because there were quite a few very interesting concepts, and I will share some of them with you. I am going to start randomly, and this is page 143. The fifth principle is the Zorro Circle, and the book follows several principles, or rather advises people to follow them to be happier. So let's go ahead and read this. Zorro goes to Gotham. As a native of the Southwest, Zorro never got to fight crime in New York City, but in a way the same lessons that made Zorro a hero have helped make New York a safer city. In his book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell recounts how city officials battled the rising crime rate in the 80s and 90s. It was an overwhelming problem that no one quite knew how to fix, no matter how much money the city spent. No matter what the police did, they just couldn't seem to curb the dangerous trend. Finally, a small group of officials surprised everyone by adopting a radical new strategy based on the now famous broken windows theory. First devised in 1982 by sociologists James Q. Wilson and George Kelly, the theory explains how small acts of vandalism can quickly balloon into widespread crime. As the theory has it, one broken window in an abandoned building will soon multiply into many broken windows, which will lead to graffiti, then muggings, then car thefts, and so on. So the city officials decided to see whether this also worked in reverse. They started with the subway, immediately redirecting all their money and attention toward fixing the windows and cleaning up the graffiti, literally one car at a time. Understandably, city denizens were quite skeptical at first. As Gladwell explains, many subway advocates at the time told them not to worry about graffiti, to focus on the larger questions of crime and subway reliability, and it seemed like reasonable advice. Worrying about graffiti at a time when the entire system was close to collapse seems as pointless as scrubbing the decks of the Titanic as it headed towards the iceberg. But despite the cries of these detractors, the city officials stuck to their plan, slowly expanding their efforts to include more and more subway lines until all of the trains in the city were clean. And as their circle started to expand, so did their results. Before long, subway crime of all kinds, from fare beating and to armed robbery, had dropped rapidly. Then they expanded their circle by cleaning up graffiti in the city at large, and amazingly they soon saw crime fall across the board. The point is, small successes can add up to major achievements. All it takes is drawing the first circle in the sand. So this is the last portion of this chapter, and what the chapter was all about is that at times we look at the big picture and it just seems unachievable to us because it is so big and it's so hard to really comprehend it all. And the reality is, if we decide to break it down into smaller successes, smaller projects, they will be more doable. Now, I can't say that this is the first time I hear this concept, but here they have very interesting examples, and I appreciated them quite a bit. So let's move on to principle number 6, the 20-second rule. How to turn bad habits into good ones by minimizing barriers to change. During one of the first trainings I ever gave on Wall Street, an impatient-looking man stood up in the back of the room and shouted over the heads of his fellow analysts, "Sean, I know you're from Harvard and everything, but isn't it all a huge waste of time? Isn't positive psychology just common sense?" I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I hadn't yet been in the consulting business long enough to know that being publicly challenged like this comes with the territory. Still, I gathered my wits and did my best to address the inquisitor head on. I started by telling him that positive psychology draws on ideas from many esteemed sources, ranging from ancient Greek philosophers to hallowed religious traditions, to modern-day writers and thinkers. What's more, I went on, the principles and theories are then empirically tested and validated. So while some of the ideas espoused by positive psychology may very well be common sense, it's the science behind them that makes them unique and valuable. Clearly, though, this guy was just not buying it. He sat back down with a smug look, and I moved on to the next question, trying to accept the fact that you just can't win them all. Not until after the session, as I sat with several of the analysts over lunch, did the significance of this encounter reveal itself. "Do you remember that guy who stood up during your talk?" one of them asked. I said that I very much did. Another analyst leaned in close. "This guy is the most unhappy person here. It's like a rain cloud follows over his head all the time. We can't put him on any teams because he's toxic. This was a turning point for me. Here was someone who had dismissed most of what I had just been saying as too obvious to even discuss. Yet, apparently, it wasn't obvious enough. I realized that he was the living embodiment of one of the greatest paradoxes of human behavior. Common sense is not common action. Would you be surprised if I told you that cigarettes are not a great source of vitamin C? Or that watching hours of reality television will not dramatically raise your IQ? Probably not. Similarly, we all know that we should exercise, sleep 8 hours, eat healthier, and be kind to others. But does this common knowledge make things any easier? Of course not. Because in life, knowledge is only part of the battle. Without action, knowledge is often meaningless. As Aristotle put it, to be excellent, we cannot simply think or feel excellent. We must act excellently. Yet, the action required to follow through on what we know is often the hardest part. That's why, even though doctors know better than anyone the importance of exercise and diet, 44% of them are overweight. It's also why organizational gurus are often messy. Religious leaders can be blasphemous, and why even some positive psychologists aren't happy all the time. I work with countless business people who complain that every Monday they make the same resolutions to stop procrastinating or quit smoking, to keep up with their inbox or start seeing their kids more. Yet every Friday they find themselves wondering where the week went and what got in their way. The fact of the matter is, positive habits are hard to keep, no matter how commonsensical they might be. Like most people, I wage the same battle every January 1st, and by January 10th, I'm right back where I started. In fact, the New York Times reports that a whooping 80% of us break our New Year's resolutions. Even when we feel committed to positive change, sustaining it for any real length of time can seem nearly impossible. All too often our pledges go unfulfilled, and today's treadmill becomes tomorrow's clothing rack. That's true. And if our brains have the capacity to change, as we now know they do, why is changing our behavior so hard? And how can we make it easier? That's a really good question. We are mere bundles of habits. During the years I spent working in Harvard's research lab, my workday started with a long ride up the elevator in Williams James Hall. The 15-story building has been home to Harvard's psychology department for decades, and it has housed more than its fair share of fascinating research, from Skinner and his famous box to rambunctious abominable monkeys and genetically engineered rodents, all humanely treated, which is more than we can say for the graduate students. The discovery is made by the building's namesake, though might be the proudest heritage. While his brother Henry was gaining worldwide fame as a novelist, William James was carving out his own niche in history with his breakthroughs in the field of psychology. Born a few years into the second half of the 19th century, James applied his training in medicine, philosophy, and psychology to his lifelong study of the human mind. He taught Harvard's first experimental psychology class in 1875, and by 1890 has published Principle of Psychology, a 1,200-page tour de force that became the precursor of the modern psychology textbook. As I tell my students every year, think of the poor undergraduates who took William James' class before you complain too loudly about this week's reading assignment. In my mind, though, the greatest contribution William James made to the field of psychology is one that was a full century ahead of his time. Humans, James said, are biologically prone to habit, and it is because we are mere bundles of habits that we are able to automatically perform many of our daily tasks, from brushing our teeth first thing in the morning to setting the alarm before climbing into bed at night. It is precisely because habits are so automatic that we rarely stop and think about the enormous role they play in shaping our behavior, and in fact our lives. After all, if we had to make a conscious choice about every single little thing we did all day, we would likely be overwhelmed by breakfast. Take this morning, for example. I'm guessing that you too didn't walk into the bathroom, look quizzically into the mirror, and ask yourself, should I put on clothes today? You didn't have to debate the pros and cons. You didn't have to call on your reserves of willpower. You just did it the same way you probably combed your hair, gulped your coffee, locked your front door, and so on. And accepting the exhibitionists in the reading public, you did not have to remind yourself all day to keep those clothes on. It was not a struggle. It didn't deplete your reserves of energy or brain power. It was second nature, automatic, a habit. None of this seems particularly groundbreaking to us today, but what William James concluded was indeed crucial to our understanding of behavioral change. Given our natural tendency to act out of habit, James surmised, couldn't the keys to sustaining positive change be to turn each desired action into habit so that it would come automatically without much effort, thought, or choice? As the father of modern psychology so shrewdly advised, if we want to create lasting change, we should make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. Habits are like financial capital. Forming one today is an investment that will automatically give out returns for years to come. Yeah, indeed. Although we know how difficult it is to form those habits. Yeah. I like the sounds of paper. Daily strokes of effort. Of course, this is where the phrase easier said than done has particular relevance. Good habits may be the answer, but how do we create them in the first place? William James had a prescription for that too. He called it daily strokes of effort. This is hardly revelatory. Gosh, I can't pronounce that word. Basically, a reworking of the same old dictum, practice makes perfect. Still, he was on to something far more sophisticated than he could possibly have known at the time. A tendency to act, he wrote, only becomes effectively ingrained in us in proportion to the interrupted frequency with which the actions actually occur, and the brain grows to their use. In other words, habits form because our brain actually changes in response to frequent practice. In fact, James had this exactly right, though it would take 100 years before neuroscientists could explain why. Remember how we learned that the brain's structure and pathways are flexible and elastic? Yeah, we did learn it in the beginning. Well, it turns out that as we progress through our days, learning new facts, completing new tasks, and having new conversations, our brains are constantly changing and rewiring to reflect these experiences. With apologies to the delicate nuances of neuroscience, here is what's happening in a nutshell. Within our brains are billions upon billions of neurons, interconnected in every which way to form a complex set of neural pathways. Electrical currents travel down those pathways from neuron to neuron, delivering the messages that make up our every thought and action. The more we perform a particular action, the more connections form between the corresponding neurons. This is the origin of the common phrase, cells that fire together, wire together. The stronger this link, the faster the message can travel down the pathway. This is what makes the behavior seem second nature or automatic. This is also how we become skilled in an activity with practice. For instance, the first time you try to juggle, the neural pathways involved aren't used, and so the message travels slowly. The more time you spend juggling, the more those pathways get reinforced, so that the 8th day of practice, the electrical currents are firing at a much more rapid pace. This is when you'll notice that juggling comes easier, requires less concentration, and that you can do it faster. Eventually, you can be listening to music, chewing gum, and having a conversation with someone else, all while those 3 oranges are flying through the air. Juggling has become automatic, a habit, cemented in your brain by a solid new neural network of neural pathways. Given all that William James had right so many years ago, we should forgive him the one thing he got wrong. He believed, as did most scientists of his day, that this ability to create lasting brain change was exclusive to the young. Essentially, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, school of thought. Thankfully, that's not the case. As you'll recall from the beginning of this book, scientists now know that the brain remains plastic and malleable well past the age of 20 through even more senior year. That means that we have the power to create new habits and then reap the benefits whether we are 72 or 22. That's exciting, right? So as long as you guys make your resolutions a habit, sticking with it, and making it second nature, you should be fine. I know, easier said than done. But anyway, as I'm going to continue reading this, I hope this was a little bit informative and, most importantly, relaxing and somewhat